you just wrote a recent book that looks at this on both a historical and a global level, and looking at authoritarianism, and it dives into some of these issues. But so, as we kind of move to the particulars very quickly, can you kind of set the historical framework for us in a minute or two of where these laws came from and their impact?
Thank you, Jeremy. In the world, 70 countries have blasphemy laws, half of them are Muslim majority. In two particular issues, Muslim majority problem is deeper. 35 out of 50 countries have these laws, and their severe punishments is deeper. In 6 countries with capital punishment, all of them are Muslim majority. In the non-Muslim world, Italy had the law with 3 years punishment, which in prison, which has been abolished recently. So in the Muslim world, the problem is deeper than just religious freedom. It impacts socioeconomic underdevelopment, authoritarianism, and recently brain drain. Many young people are leaving their countries because of the lack of freedom. To clarify, let me just compare what I did in my new book, Islam, Authoritarianism and Underdevelopment, comparing the Muslim world in between 6th and mid-11th centuries, when there was certain level of diversity, dynamism, and multiculturalism. Muslims were much more developed than Western Europeans in terms of economy and sciences. They produced cutting-edge philosophers and made many financial innovations and contributions. But things change in the mid-11th century. A Sunni Orthodoxy emerged with what I call ulema-state alliance. And then after it emerged in Central Asia, Iran and Iraq, it moved to Syria and Egypt. And the alliance between Islamic scholars, ulama, and the state marginalized the intellectuals and economic entrepreneurs. That's the problem since mid-11th century, which gradually led to economic and social and intellectual stagnation. And at this point, the very important issue for Muslims to remember how between 8th and mid-11th century, the Islamic ulama were independent, autonomous, and put a separation between themselves and the state authorities. So therefore, Islam has a history of separation. So therefore, let me conclude by saying that the problem we see today is more historical and political problem than a religious one. Islam does not reject a separation between religious and political authorities. In fact, it had such a history that should be remembered by both Muslims and non-Muslims today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Ahmed, the final question goes to you. In the framing for the event, we're talking about this new policy report, looking at religious institutions, and it picks up on some of the points that Farnaz is making about the need for institutions to have within their own scholarship internally, this internal debate, but then also what they contribute in society at large, in the political process, in other words, in other ways. So from that policy report and the Forest Project more broadly, what are maybe some of the observations that looking at these issues through that lens gives to this challenge?
Thank you, Jeremy. So in the Religious Freedom Institute, we publish a policy report for making recommendations on this multi-level problem. And we encourage the rulers and the public opinion makers and the people of Muslim majority countries with these laws to stop passing new laws and abrogate, if possible, the existing one. If it is too utopian, we ask them to embrace the European way that Europeans kept these blasphemy laws at that letters without implementation for over a century. That's maybe a middle ground recommendation. For the future, two things make me optimistic. One thing is that, as I briefly mentioned in my first part, was that this problem is mostly historically constructed, particularly in two episodes of history. Because when we look at the Quran, there are about 140 verses about compassion, peace, toleration, mutual understanding. About the particular issue of blasphemy, For example, you see in the Baqarah chapter, La ikraha fid din, which means no compulsion in religion. Then in Surah Nisa, in the 4th chapter, you see that specifically God tells the Muslims, if you see those who are making fun of the verses in this book, the Quran, leave them and do not come back to the gathering unless they change the topic. So it implicitly say, if they change the topic, you can sit them and talk to them again. There is no other action taking other than leaving the gathering when they make fun of the verses of the Holy Book. But despite the fact that the Quran has these specific verses, and when we look at the Sunnah, basically means the Prophet's way of life, there is no report that he himself killed someone for blasphemy, apostasy, or ordered such a punishment in his lifestyle. And therefore, either the Quran or Sunnah didn't have anything about that. But the literal notion became dominant in 2 episodes. One is the 11th century change, as I mentioned. In a very specific case, Ghazali, a prominent Muslim scholar, in his very famous book, Tahafatul Falasafa, the inconsistencies of philosophers, he attacks strongly philosophers like Farabi, Ibn Sina, and in the last 2 pages, he declared them apostates for 3 reasons, punishable by that. That was very unfortunate legacy of Ghazali, a very important genius scholar with very interesting ideas. And then after that, Ulama State Alliance picked up this idea and imposed to punish any dissenting religious and political views in the classical era. Then in the 18th, 19th century, many reforms, including the abolishment of apostasy law by the Ottomans. So the Ottomans themselves abolished it. When it came back, resurfaced in the last 40, 50 years, after the Iranian Revolution, many Muslim majority countries experienced Islamization. Zia al-Haq in Pakistan, 1997, Sharia law and everything. Then in Egypt, a more bottom-up Islamization. Even in Turkey, certain level of Islamization. And the Islamists, since their political agenda is so thin, they make this issue a big case to receive popular support. So, therefore, out of the 2 things make me optimistic about the future. One is that a reform possible by being respectful to the tradition of Islam, because the holy text, the Quran, or the Prophet's life give inspiration for freedom. The second thing, and I will conclude by that, which makes me optimistic, is that there is a new generation coming, young people, in Turkey, Iran, Arab countries, and elsewhere. And they are reacting to Islamization. We have public surveys showing that in Iran, 50% of people, especially young, are very secularized. In Turkey, secularization, even the rise of deism, rejecting Islamism, and some of them rejecting Islam. So, I hope that this will not end up with a reactionary French laïcité type, assertive secularist authoritarianism. Otherwise, we'll end up with a circle of assertive Islamism, assertive secularism, assertive secularism, assertive Islamism. I hope the young generation will find a middle ground, putting Islamists aside, but also bringing democracy and religious freedom rather than anti-religious secularism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you for your patience, Ahmed.
Alaykum salam, Fayzurt. When you look at the world today, out of 200 countries, 49 of them are Muslim majority. And 32 Muslim majority countries have blasphemy laws. 6 of them have capital punishment. And the result is devastating. In Pakistan, no one has been executed yet, but 70 people have been lynched. And 1,500 people have been arrested and put in jails and see a certain level of persecution. So this is the reality we are seeing from France to Pakistan, from individual to state level. And we have to deal with this problem. Is this only government states? It's not. Unfortunately, 3 groups or activists have been propagated on these issues. Islamists, from Ikhwan to many Jamaat Islamiyah, many Islamic group. Ulama, the Islamic scholars, from Turkey's Diyanet members to Al-Azhar to many other Islamic group, ulama. And the third, and shockingly, Sufi sheikhs. And we've been told and we've been thinking that Sufis are tolerant, open-minded, have a broad vision, but unfortunately, even in Turkey, Sufi tariqas appear to be very close-minded, very traditionalist on this issue of apostasy and blasphemy. What is the result? The result is heartbreaking. The result is that according to 2013 Pew survey, in 3 regions, subcontinent, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, over 50% of people support embracing Sharia as the law of land. And among the supporters of Sharia, 75% in Southeast Asia, 50% in the Middle East, 25% in subcontinent support the killing of apostate and the blasphemous. So this is a very deep social acceptance and support, which did not exist 50, 60 years ago. As a result of the propaganda of ulama in mosques, Sufi sheikhs in tariqas, Islamists in party rallies, they convinced the Muslim masses about these issues. So this is the problem on 2 major points. Let me briefly explain. 1, from the 8th to 12th century, Muslims were superior to Western Europeans in science and economy. When Muslims had libraries with hundreds of thousands of books, Western Europeans had only a few hundred books in their libraries. Western Europe was 5 centuries later than Muslims to produce paper. Western Europe did not have a city like Baghdad, did not have a philosopher like Ibn Sina. Even Ghazali, who criticized, challenged, and helped the decline of this intellectual dynamism, was a product of dynamism. That's why the Muslim world, after the 11th century, had very few examples of philosophers like Ibn Sina or Islamic scholars like Ghazali. And when it comes today, we have very few Nobel Prize winners. We have very few world-renowned intellectuals. We have very few world-renowned artists. Muslim world today is full of countries with authoritarianism. In terms of literacy rate, in terms of life expectancy and GNI per capita, it is below the world averages. Comparing the Muslim world today with Western Europe, it's passé. Competition is no longer even possible. But comparing with Latin America, comparing with East Asia, show that Muslims' position is worse than them. So once leading the world in philosophy and economy, we are now in the law of the lowest. And the PISA scores, which is the global test of secondary high school students, out of 90 countries, East Asians are at the top 10, Muslims at the bottom 20. Are these coincidence? They are not. Because in a country, you cannot speak the truth. In a country, there is no freedom of speech. In a country that you criticize anything about the religion, anything about the state, you're either killed as an apostate or blasphemous, or put in jail, or declared as a kafir. An ad hominem attack is a part of our daily life. Unfortunately, it began by ad hominem attacks to Ibn Sina, to Farabi, to Ibn Rushd, all the Greek Muslim philosophers having learning Greek science and making their contributions. And there is the double standards, there's hypocrisy. Why? Because when Muslims are asked why and how they did not produce world-renowned scholars, they say, oh, we have many. Even Sayyid Qutb, in his horrible books, Milestones, says that Muslims had better philosophers than Western Europeans. So when it comes to defense, you give the names of Ibn Sina, Farabi, Biruni, and others. But can these people live in a Muslim majority country freely today? Can the medical scientist Razi, not the faqih or tafsir mufassir, can live today? No. Razi, the medical scientist, philosophers, cannot leave Pakistan today, cannot live in Bangladesh today. So the fact that we have now authoritarian regimes, socioeconomic underdevelopment, intellectual stagnation is directly connected to the idea of killing apostate, punishing blasphemy, no freedom of thought, no dynamism, the ulama-state alliance, which did not exist before the 11th century. After the 11th century, with Nizamiya madrasas and everything, ulama established a partnership with the state. Now we see in Turkey, in Pakistan, in Egypt, they are together, representing political and religious monopoly, hegemony, domination. So this is the second part. And finally, so as I try to explain that this blasphemy, apostasy issues, unfortunately, propagated by ulama, by Sufi sheikhs, by Islamists, have now social basis, which kill the intellectual dynamism, and we have the vicious circle of authoritarianism, violence, and underdevelopment. And in order to solve the problem, I totally agree with Ibrahim and Mustafa that we need new interpretations, if possible, an ijma. But the last point is that, will you be able to teach Islam to your children? Are we going to be able to tell our grandchildren, etc., that Islam is the religion of peace? Islam coexists with democracy. Islam coexists with liberalism. In Turkey, Mustafa and I and people like ourselves, we debated against secularists for decades. We said that Islam is perfectly fine with democracy. The Kemalists who support the Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's position and the assertive secularist position say, no, you are wrong. You don't know what you are talking about. You will see when they come to power, they will destroy democracy. And this perception is dominant, even in my country, United States. When people talk to me, they are kind people. They don't want to offend. But in the mindset of many Western people, Islam has problems in terms of living in a democratic, liberal country. Why do they think that way? Is this because of just racism, colonial mindset? No, because when they look at the Muslim world, when they see the people saying that blasphemous should be punished, apostate should be killed, they say, where is the freedom of speech? Where is the freedom of conscience? And as I said, if we even forget about the Western people, the young Muslims in Turkey, in Iran, in Pakistan, in India, there are now many opportunities to learn about religion and politics. They have the internet. If they don't brainwashed in a specific circle of madrasa, jamaat, etc., many of them are leaving Islam. Look, Conversation just published an article about Iran with the argument that 55% of Iranians says they are no longer Muslim. They say, oh, this is a disputable, controversial data. Okay, if not 55, let's say 45. If 35 of Iranians says they are no longer Muslim, isn't it shocking? Isn't it more important than any discussion about the interpretation of this hadith, etc.? So this is the fact, reality, and time is passing. We are losing. And Muslims really is living in history. The real life today is full of shocking examples. And let me conclude saying that this is the reality on the ground, not only laws and state, but people's perceptions really embracing this very wrong idea of punishing those who have different ideas. This is wrong because it makes us underdeveloped. We no longer are able to produce intellectuals and economic entrepreneurs. And the image is getting worse and worse in the West. And the image in the mindset of our children are getting very negative. And let me conclude with a joke at 5:30 a.m. in San Diego. So in Germany, a group of Muslims tried to convert a German fellow, Hans. Hans was a nice guy. He said, yes, I want to be Muslim. Then everything was said, a ceremony of Kelime Shahadat, etc. Then they say, you need circumcision. What is circumcision? You didn't teach me. They said, we are going to cut a little bit from your penis. He said, no, I don't want to cut. No. They say, no, you should. You become a Muslim. They say, no, I'm leaving your religion. They say, oh, then we will kill you. So this is a joke, a tragic joke, but it tells many things. Yeah, I'm very happy to be in this panel and very grateful for Faizer and very thankful for Ibrahim and Mustafa for this conversation.